And we're here. All right. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here to chat about the debut Sir Callie and the Champions of Helston. I'm so excited to be here with some fantastic authors. So to kick things off, let's just go around and introduce ourselves. Give us your name, your pronouns if you want, and just tell us a little bit about your books. Let's start just alphabetical order. Ash.
Sure. Hi, I am Ash van Otterloo. I am the author of Cattywampus, A Touch of Rumpus, and The Beautiful Something Else, which comes out next year. And my pronouns are they, he.
Dang, that's me up.
Yeah.
Hello, I am Esme Symes-Smith. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the author of this very beautiful and very new middle grade queer fantasy called Sir Callie and the Champions of Helston, which is number 1 in a series of several. Woohoo!
And I am Nicole Melleby. I am the author of a bunch of books, but my most recent is The Science of Being Angry, and I was the co-editor of This Is Our Rainbow, the middle grade queer anthology, and the upcoming Camp Quilt Bag. And my pronouns are she, they.
Amazing. So I think a really great place to start, I think there's a lot of really great things we could talk about, is just generally, writing in the middle grade space, and specifically writing fantasy in the middle grade space. We are talking about a really, really brilliant queer fantasy middle grade that just came out yesterday. Everyone needs to go purchase it now. So yeah, let's just kick it off. If anyone just has any thoughts about writing fantasy for middle grade.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start. I've always been a fantasy author right back when I was a baby writer writing fan fiction. I love fantasy because it feels like a very safe way to tackle big topics. For me, I always needed sort of the bridge and the fence between fantasy and reality to kind of work myself out in the big things. And something that I've always struggled with contemporary is that it's so real and so right there, it's almost too close. So I always liked that barrier. I love being able to use magic as a metaphor, especially for queerness and neurodivergence and all of that stuff. So when it came to writing my own books away from fan fiction, fantasy was the logical place to start, even though I hate writing a magic system. It's the worst. And every time I write a book, my agent or my editor is like, Esme, work it out. And I'm just like, I don't want to. But I guess that's the price we pay for the genre that we love.
I think it's funny because in here I write mostly contemporary. And then Ash, you have kind of that, magic within a more realistic setting, and then you have Sir Callie has its own.
We have the whole spectrum here. It's great.
Yeah. So I always feel like for me, I not only do I write contemporary, but I set them in my hometown, so I don't have to create an entire world. So I can never imagine having to do that kind of work. Was it for you when you were doing Sir Callie? Was it a challenge? I know magic systems was one thing, but what about the whole kingdom and setting? What did you pull from? How did you figure that out?
It's really funny, and the reason why I love fantasy in particular is because I hate research. I hate research with the passion of 1,000 flames. So I prefer to sit there and just take more time to imagine things, and that's hard work and it's kind of a pain in the ass, but at least I'm not trying to make it real. Because I couldn't do that, and I would just sit there going I hate this, and I'd inevitably end up getting something wrong that someone was very passionate about, and I couldn't stand to do that. When it came to the setting of Callie and Helston in particular, I really wanted it to be a love letter to the places I grew up. So it's very much based on the southwest of England, like Dartmoor and Cornwall. Helston is very inspired by Tintagel, which is, legend has it, the birthplace of King Arthur, which is really cool. And Tintagel has the bridge across the ravine and the really cool ghosty statue of King Arthur. And I really struggle for setting. So when I was really trying to set it in a realistic place, but with magic, it made sense to me to set it in Tintagel in Cornwall because it's so beautiful and magical. It's hard.
Oh my goodness. Now that I hear you say that, I've actually been to Cornwall, and I'm reading back through the book in my head, and I'm like, yeah, oh my gosh, they
I
nailed
know,
it.
and even the cover, like you've got the bridge and the castle, and my wife and I were lucky enough to go back to England in July, July. And we took a trip down to Tintagel, and I managed to get a picture of my arc on the bridge and King Arthur, and it was just like, it was so cool to see the places that, you know, my world grew out of the rocks, and, you know, it was amazing. It was very magical.
Was that okay? So was that kind of intimidating to like tackle like a big trope or genre that comes from where you come from, right? Like, was that intimidating at all? Were you thinking like, wow, this is my own unique take on this. People are gonna be looking at it and like comparing it to like, I don't know, this rich body of trope, I guess. Like, how did you feel about that?
I love tropes, and I feel like tropes are just like the cornerstone of literature in particular. And I love playing with them and kind of like twisting them just a little bit so they're new but also recognizable and comfortable. So it's like a safe place to do new things. Like, that's so fun for me. And you know, classic fantasy is something that I grew up on. I love Lord of the Rings. I enjoy Game of Thrones. Whatever, we're not talking about it. And like the Tamora Pierce books, which are just like so classic, and you know, I don't think they're overdone at all, because like you can do so much with them and bring them into the 21st century, but it does take, you know, thought and time and effort, and really actually quite deep consideration to not fall back on like the cliches that were kind of harmful back in like the 90s and the 80s. So that was something that was really important to me, especially in like drafts. You know, I always draft with the door closed and like basically my eyes shut. But when it comes to like the second and third draft, that was when I was kind of like, okay, I need to write with intention and revise with intention and really kind of think about what I'm doing. So I have this like basis that's very, very classic and very, very familiar. But then like I'm working out like what I want it to do and who I want to speak to whilst I'm doing this.
I think that paid off so beautifully. Like my background is like magical realism, slash like a little bit of horror, and I think that horror is very similar in that it's really effective when you super ground it in something that people are familiar with. So when you take a trope or a magic or a world that is that familiar, you have so much room to play because people are relaxed and their brains get a chance to rest into something that's familiar. Yes, and then you really turn it on its head, which you did so beautifully. I really love the queer themes that you're able to bring to the story, obviously. And I cried. I think being able to rest into something that felt so familiar and lived in, but see myself in it, like it touched me. I cried a lot. It was beautiful. Well, I was like, oh wow, like
the first people I wanted to send it to when it was done, you know, because you guys are amazing. But like I'm always really impressed when people can do like contemporary books, because I know you both write very much from home, and they're so grounded in just like the earth beneath your feet. Like, I'd love to know a little bit more about how you do that. Nick, if you want to start.
I mean, I definitely pull right from, like, I write from my hometown. I try and give us, you know, embed as much of, because I'm on the Jersey Shore, so I try and, you know, my kids are all beach kids, are all, you know, everything that comes along with being that beach kid, and being able to kind of explore things and ideas and the idea of like what home is to me, but from a queer lens, which, you know, I wasn't, well, I mean, not that I wasn't, but I wasn't aware when I was, you know, the age of a middle grade character. So to be able to kind of take all of the feelings and all of the ideas of the stories that I grew up with in that age, but set them at home and make them queer. And that's something that always is kind of my favorite part about it. And, you know, it does get hard. I know, Ash, your upcoming is very personal to you too. So it does get tricky in that way, because you are coming at it, you know, you're coming at it head on, like you mentioned. So you don't have kind of that, there's not really metaphors to play with. Sometimes
it's like a protection, you know, the protection of the genre.
But it's, you know, I like telling honest, not that fantasy isn't honest, but I like being as honest and as real as possible. So I always come at things contemporary because of that. And because I think I'd have a really hard time creating an entire world when I just want to set it in my backyard instead. I mean, Ash, you said all your stories and you're like, you know, where you grew up and Rain as well.
Yeah, a little bit, but also I love, like, I do feel like I love having the leeway of having a magic system and magical elements to add into it, partially because, like, I can get turned around in my own backyard. I have like a kind of, I have an antagonistic relationship with the physical world, like at best of times. So magic kind of gives like this license to be like, okay, well, I'm gonna let the vehicle be that like something that I've made up myself, right? Like I don't have to have a full understanding of like a city structure system. I can just make up a magical system, and that works out a lot better sometimes. Yeah.
Do you draw your magic from like other stories, or is it like fresh and new in your head, or both?
Kind of. I really love alchemy. So I like the idea of taking something that exists and finding who's not there, right? And then asking myself, what would this look like for the person who's not there, right? Because magic really it pours through people. I think even in stories, but in real life too. So like the person that it pours through is going to heavily affect how it plays out in the real world. So who's missing from the story means there's magic missing from the story too. So it's kind of fun to be like, okay, I'm going to take this magic system, but like take the person who's missing and then tell the story from that perspective. Oh, that's like, it's like one of those baking shows where they give you like ingredients that you have to use together. I love that. That's my favorite way to write.
That's amazing. I love that. I'm obsessed.
I think you've done it really well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I have a question for you both. So I am currently working on a lecture about Kate DiCamillo and her work as a middle grade author. And one of the things while I was writing and reading up about her, she, you know, one of the things that she said is like, how do I tell the truth but make it bearable for your audience, for your young audience? Mm-hmm. So, you know, there's a lot of truth and a lot of hardship and a lot in both of your works. So, you know, how do the two of you go about telling the truth but making it bearable?
Yeah. For me, what I love most about middle grade is that there was always light at the end of the tunnel. Like, no matter what you put your young characters through, you know that they're going to be okay at the end. There's going to be therapy. There's going to be hot chocolate. It's going to be fine. So that's something that I always work out, especially when, you know, their journeys through the trauma is kind of like longer and more winding. And something that I was especially invested in with Callie and their friends is that I wanted each of the kids to have a different journey. And I wanted each one to take their own time and do what they needed to do. And, you know, I feel like Callie at the beginning of the book is pretty actualized, which is very impressive for them. But their story is really about helping the other kids with theirs. And then I feel like Elowen and Willow are, you know, relatively straightforward, a little bit. And then you have Edwin, who's very much like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, like the whole way through. Poor kid. So for me, it was really important to like represent all those different journeys. Especially because like when I was a middle grade reader, it really bothered me that there wasn't that representation for like messy trauma, you know. You know, you either come out the hero and forgiving, or you come out the villain, and there's nothing in between. So it was like really, really, really important to me to be able to show that there is more than one way to be brave. There is more than one way to, you know, go on your journey, and that you are deserving of a happy ending no matter how you get there.
Yeah. I feel like the three of us are, all of our writing, now that I'm thinking about it, is really strongly drawn to the messy kid who's not getting it right all the time, right? Like I feel like that's such the ability to like write a kid who's getting it wrong, who could be considered in some ways like an anti-hero sometimes, right? To be able to gift that character in the story friends who can bring humor, who can bring levity, who can bring like these moments of like, oh, let's have some tea, let's have a dance party, let's have this, like, you can provide queer community specifically for queer kids, like that they might not have access to or be able to identify like in the real world. Like I really feel like books are friends. Like if you don't have access to the support you need, books really can be. I'm sorry, there's something like squealing in my house and I'm trying to figure out what it is. Yeah, but I think it's really so beautiful to be able to gift like supportive adults, to gift family members, to gift like people who have these beautiful moments together, for people who might not otherwise be able to have that. Yeah.
Well, it kind of proves that it's possible. You know, even if it's not a reality in your home or your close environment, I feel like even just someone writing about this world and these people where you can recognize yourself, it gives you options and it gives you hope that, you know, even if this is terrible right now, then, you know, there is a possibility to get through it and find love and light at the end, you know, and that was really important, I think. And, you know, we all, well, maybe not all, but like, especially queer folk, we kind of like lose ourselves in those fictions just because, you know, sometimes that's the best we can do, and that's okay. And, you know, what you said, I feel like we do all write about what would classically be like an anti-hero, but I feel like queer kids are often, you know, the anti-hero. And unless they sort of, you know, toe the line and mask, then that's their option, and it sucks. But we're in 2022 now, and we need to give them better.
Yeah. Queer kids and kids, you know, dealing with trauma, they're not going to react and have the same emotions as kids, you know, who might not have similar traumas. So, you know, to have these unpredictable kids not reacting the way that maybe society and the people around them expect them to because of the trauma doesn't, you know, to be able to show readers that doesn't make you a bad person, that just makes you a different person, a different type of person. And, you know, you're still worthy of friends, you're still worthy of dance parties, you're still, you know, worthy of yes, and all these people around you. Even, you know, when I read Callie, just reading even Edwin, and you know, you get frustrated and you get, you know, you want him to, you know, get it, and but you still understand him, and you still even as a reader, you're like, no, this kid still deserves everything all the other kids deserve as well, and you know, just because he struggles differently doesn't make him any less worthy of everything, you know, the love and the fun and the friendship that, you know, Callie deserves or whatnot. And I think that is something that you did exceptionally well in this book, because you did present a character who, you know, did take that one step forward, two steps back, and still managed to keep them a character that you want to get it right.
I always love it when people love him. Because he has all the love in the world.
I really love that I never, like, not once did I feel invited to hate him in the story. Like, there was never that invitation to, let's hate on this character because he's getting it really super wrong. And we don't love, I mean, everyone was allowed to have boundaries. And I really appreciated, like, the characters having those and saying, that what you did, it wasn't cool. We don't appreciate it. Without, like, you know, drop kicking the whole character into the sun and being like, oh, this is a bad one, because I'm a really firm believer that there are no bad kids. Like, I don't believe that there are bad children. And I think it's especially important for people to be able to see, like, oh, you can get it like super, super wrong and people can tell you no, and you can still be loved. You can still be a part of the group, right? Like, I really love that you did that. And it makes me smile that you did that.
It's really funny because, like, in the very, very early drafts, I met Edwin first. I was like, I'm not gonna love you. You're gonna be the bully. You're gonna be the stereotypical we don't like you, because he's just my type of character who I love with my whole heart, and you know, whatever, it will monopolize the story. I was like, no, not this one. And then there he goes, and we love him.
He never had a chance of being
I know. I never had
villain.
a chance. It's terrible.
Yeah. That's great. I love it.
And on that, I would actually love to hear all three of you. So you're talking about crafting these characters right now, and I would love to hear what it's like crafting these queer characters, and also what it's like crafting kind of the bad guys and the villains, especially in middle grade, when like you have to do it with such care and such, there's a line you can't, like, especially Ash, you mentioned working in horror, like you can't, they're middle schoolers, so you don't want to scare them. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Oh my gosh.
You want to appropriately scare them, I think is really the, because you want to feel them terrifying, but in the right way. So
yeah, exactly. I think humor helps so much, like, to not cross the line for like truly horrific villains. Like in my first book, there are like townspeople who are responding very poorly to people's magic, I guess. Which is like heavily queer coded. But there are also like these zombies, but the zombies are hilarious. So there's like a lot of fodder for jokes there. And in the second book that I wrote, there's someone who's like more like the mustache twirling villain character, right? And I really don't like him. But the last book that I wrote was really a challenge for that reason, Nicole, because like there are a couple of people who are definitely antagonists, right? And they're causing the main character a lot of pain. But it was really important, since it was less fantastical, it was really important to me to write like really complex characters so that we understand like every antagonist in the book that I just wrote is also queer, right? Like people are complex, and people who are hurt tend to perpetuate hurt, So I think it kind of goes back to like what Esme did, which is I can enact damage and also still be forgivable, right? Like I can make really poor choices, but at any point, if I decide to turn around and make amends and do the right thing and to try to come back into community, I can do that, right? Like that was really important for me to include. I don't know. What about you, Nicole? How is that writing like in non-fantasy space? Like, is that different for you, or?
Yeah, I think it is, because I feel like my books don't necessarily have like a villain other than like misunderstanding, and like the villain is misunderstanding, or the villain is the fact that like no one knows how to relate to these kids and how to help them, or homophobia. So I think for me, a lot of the villains come from internal and the people around them, and even the people who mean well in their lives, come as like an antagonistic force, because you misunderstanding me is stopping me from succeeding whatever I need to, or get to wherever I need to get. So it's a little different in that way. And I want to kind of throw the question back to you guys, because how do you think about internal versus external plots, right? So a lot of our stories, you have these queer kids going through these really, and they're in it, but you also have to actually drive the story. You can't just, I would read it, but you can't just have a kid like living their life. And it's something that I used to struggle with. And I had to kind of learn just to trust myself a bit. But I remember for my one book, How to Become a Planet, I was so sure that I didn't have enough external plot that I added literal fire to the book. I added a whole so like there's 5 fires being set, right? And at one point I was like, this isn't working. Why are there fires? So I ended up taking that plot out, and nothing else changed in the story.
You're doing too much. Yeah.
So how do you balance the two, and how do you know when you need more of one, or how do you guys go about
I really enjoy like the balance between internal and external, and I feel like I always begin internal because it's the characters that mean the most to me. At its heart, Callie is very much like a 2020 rage book. It's really funny talking about like, oh, let's be careful with the villains, let's make complex characters. I was like, no, we're gonna hate this guy, we're not gonna forgive him, and he's completely irredeemable. And that's his choice. So I always say that the moment someone unironically likes Perrin is the day I quit, because we're not doing that. But honestly, I really enjoyed writing him because he feels so real. And like he's the embodiment of what scares me, you know, as a kid, as now, because, you know, he's this charismatic, powerful man who's really validating and inspiring people to be hateful without them even realizing it. And that's so scary, you know, especially for anyone who is different in any way at all. Like, I don't think people who aren't in those demographics really understand how absolutely terrifying that is. So that was something that was really important for me to get into that story, as well as, like, you know, it's set on the backdrop of like an upcoming war with like this mysterious witch and the dragons. But spoilers for book 2, we won't go into that. So it was really about the kids fighting their own like internal battles, both inside themselves and inside like the very sheltered city of Helston, you know, that they can't really escape from. It's like you have to win the battle before you can fight the war. So that was a really fun thing to do. Yeah, when we first subbed Callie, it was a standalone at a very reasonable 60,000 words. And then my editor asked me to make it big and sweeping. So I was like, oh God, now I have to do the external stuff. Let's get some dragons in there somewhere. Let's get out of Helston and see what's on the other side of the bridge. So for me, the external is always the hardest part, because I love internal drama and, you know, interpersonal. And honestly, if I could, I would write everything in just like a plain white room with 2 chairs and 2 characters, and they'd just be chatting and arguing and whatever, and that would be my happy place. But unfortunately, we had to make things dynamic, which is very unfair. But I found it a fun challenge to kind of really focus on the external conflict of the series as a whole. It was hard, but it was fun.
Oh, I love that so much. I think I'm the opposite of you in that, like, for like my first book, my agent has like a strong editorial bent and sat down and was like, this book is really good and you already know what it's about, but you do not want to express the emotions at all. And I was like, that is correct. That is kind of how I am as a person too. I'm so glad you noticed. But I really enjoy writing internal arc now. Like, I love it. It's one of my favorite things to write. And I think that it partially it was giving myself permission to do so, right?
It's hard, man. It's hard.
I think so often people, like, if you have a lot of big emotions too, or you have a strong reaction to the world because it's not built for you, then you tend to be told to be quiet about your emotions often. So it was kind of an exercise of letting myself do what I was already doing internally and bringing it to the external. And I think the lovely thing about fantasy is that often the external prods that you prod your character toward the realization that you want them to have by the end of the book, right? Or the growth arc you want them to have by the end of the book. They often are kind of like metaphorical echoes of what's going on internally, right? So that's the lovely thing about fantasy, is that they really can be anything. Like, you can get real artsy with it, right? I think
it's sometimes metaphor, it's fine.
Yes, exactly. Like, what is this dragon a metaphor for? Right? Like, so and I don't think you necessarily have to have like a one-to-one explanation for every external magical thing that happens. I think that your intuition usually already knows, and your reader's intuition already knows as well. You don't need to necessarily sit down and write it down. But I do think it's like it's this beautiful dance between like internal struggle and like the external like reflection, right? Like, this is who you could become if you do not address this, or, you know, this is the natural outcome should you choose not to challenge yourself, which I think is really lovely. It's a gorgeous thing, though. Yeah.
And I have a question. Right now, I want to go ahead and let anyone know watching. If you have a question, drop it in the comment, just in the comments, and we'll get to them in just a moment. But I don't want to end with this question because it's not like the most up question ever. But I'm really interested, because middle grade is such it's a very specific kind of age range. What it's like as queer authors now, having to craft these worlds that are hopefully full of joy and love for these kids in this world we're in now. I'm just very curious how you do that, how you take care of yourself, and how you keep it happy.
Yeah,
Good
well,
question.
it was.
Oh,
It
that
was
is like,
Yeah, it was really interesting with Callie 1 and Callie 2 because I had expected Callie 1 to be a reflection and be like, oh, let's look back on this terrible time and this is the story that grew out of it, but look where we are now. And I'm just sitting with book 2 going, oh gosh, oh no, this is very pertinent right now. So it is hard. For me, I really let myself feel my feelings. And just like my indignation and my rage and just like my absolute perplexion that, you know, the people in the power, the grown-ups, the people that should know better are letting these people be hurt and saying, oh, this is fine because it's not us, you know? And that's such it's the way I felt as a child. And it's the way I feel as a grown-up. And I don't think anything's really changed in that place. So really, I for me, it's very much about not trying to tie it up. It's kind of letting the story unfold. And, you know, I don't know what the end of the story is. I know that's going to be hopeful because, like, that's what I write. But, like, you know, the end of book 1, it ends on a high note. But you're also very aware that, you know, the battle has really only just begun. And just because you get rid of one person who's causing trouble doesn't mean that he didn't leave a lasting, like, poison behind. You know, just because one person's gone doesn't mean the problem is solved. So for me, it's very much, you know, you got to get quite real and quite, it's terrifying. But feel the feelings, feel the rage. And, you know, I think we do need to get angry. And it's not enough to just sit still and smile and be polite because that's not fixing anything. You gotta find your rage and you gotta do something about it. And that's really what the Callie series is about.
I agree. I'm from the rural South, and so these kind of books. Obviously, like for most people, we didn't have access to them because they're just like it wasn't. You couldn't pick up a book, especially not a fantasy book about like a queer character, but especially not in certain places. So I guess as I'm writing, you know, that is still true, especially with book bans going on. And access to representation being like actually physically blocked, even though that the books exist. So I guess like as I'm writing, for my own emotional process, I do have like some pretty hefty like self-care practices in place when I'm writing something that's a little bit on the heavy side. Like for instance, if there's like a lot of terrible things going on in the news, like I find out about it, but I don't like live there, right? Like I'm not like doom scrolling on my phone because it's already heavy when I'm writing, right? Like I have the information, so now I need to like make sure that I'm checking in and caring for myself because I'm always thinking like what I'm writing is a letter of hope to someone, and that might be what they get, right? Like that's what they get maybe for the next 5, 10, 15 years before they have access to be able to go and find community and people to kind of shore them up, right? So I'm always trying to be so careful to leave like a really positive breadcrumb trail back to mental health, back to community, back to self-care. Like it's like a blueprint. This is how you do it, right? These are the feelings that come up. This is how you do it. Like hang in there. Like it's always such a little when I was a kid, whenever we moved out of a place, I like to leave little messages for whoever moved in, like in the closet. I would like scratch little messages in the closet, like little, I hope you have a nice time when you get here. I feel like I'm kind of doing that sometimes in like libraries with books, you know, like,
I love that.
It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I hope you enjoy your stay here. I hope it doesn't last forever.
That's kind of what I wanted to do with my author's note too. And I knew I wanted to write one like immediately. But it's very much, I want it to be right at the front of the book, the first thing that you open to. So even if, you know, the kid's not taking the book home or they're not allowed to, whatever, they can see my message to them saying like, these are the terrible things that's happening. You're safe, you're allowed, you know, you have community, whether you know it or not. And here are some resources for you. That was just like a practical thing that was really important that I wanted to do. Because it's really horrible right now, and I definitely get myself caught in my big feelings, thinking like, what if someone gets in trouble for reading this? What if someone gets in trouble for taking it home, because you don't know what kind of dangers they're going to be in. And I was having a sit down with the wonderful Laurie, who's doing my teacher's guide, and my God, she's amazing, like so good. And we had these amazing questions and resources, and we're just going through it, and I'm just sitting there going like, I'm not going to be allowed to do this. What if teachers get in trouble for like having this in their classroom? And I'm just like, I haven't even sent it to my editor yet, because I just can't stand to think about it. So we have this and it exists and it's beautiful, but like, it doesn't feel safe. And that's really, really scary. Like, I feel like where I am in St. Louis, it's pretty okay. We're pretty lucky, but that's definitely a bubble. That is not the usual. So I'm definitely mindful of, my readership who are in Texas, for example, in all these places where like their identities are literally being outlawed. And I think the worst thing ever is just the way that they're going after like the caregivers of these kids too, as well as, the people.
Yeah.
It sucks. It just sucks. I hate it. And that's why I'm writing. So yeah. Okay, Nicole, you're
I do think for everything that makes it hard, I think the thing that makes it easy is the kids. Because for everything that sucks to do and for everything that's hard on my end, for every hate email I get 3 more from a kid telling me how much I need the book or whatnot.
Makes it worth doing.
Yeah. So it's hard, and you can get kind of lost in it, but then you kind of remember these kids need these books, and if I can do. I always come back to, there's a statistic that basically says if there's one supportive adult in a queer kid's life, the suicide rate drops by 50%, which is a huge amount. So if I could, be that one adult via a book or two, it makes everything else a little easier to kind of hold on to. And I always say
prove that it's possible to find hope at the end.
Yeah. And I always say, they can't ban all, the more we write, the more we do this. So they won't be able to keep up. So we're just out publish them and hope for the best.
Yes.
That was a beautiful question, Jacob. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you for answering. I know it's not easy conversation, but thank you for answering that. We got a question from Sabrina.
Love Sabrina. Yay, you're here.
What is your favorite small world building character detail that you added into Sir Callie? And I'd love to expand this into all 3 of y'all and just talk about like a small moment that, maybe someone might not notice right off the bat that you really love about Sir Callie.
I love all the pinky promises. Because, even though it's like a medieval fantasy, the magic of a pinky promise is universal. And I have never gone back on a pinky promise in my life. And if I make a pinky promise, it's for real. So I love the way the kids kind of learn to trust each other through those pinky promises. Because it's very familiar, and it's very easy and something that kids can take away with them.
Yes. I love the juxtaposition of like Owen's just like dignity and the fact that Callie is completely feral and they're friends. Like, I love it. It's my favorite.
I enjoy it so much. I'm listening to the audiobook right now, and it's just filling me with
I love it.
I was immediately drawn to the fact that Willow's name is Willow, which is, you hear Willow, you think, all female name or whatnot. And everything just kind of surrounding, like, no, my name is Willow, and this is who I am. But in such a different way than I think we usually are allowed to see in these sort of stories and for kids. So I was always like, that detail always stood out to me as I love this. I love that this kid is like, no, my name is Willow. I'm like, all right.
Willow's name is like the hardest one to come up with because it had to serve such a specific purpose, but it also had to be exactly him. Because it had to be like something that could be shortened to something like very masculine, but it also had to be like quite feminine, but also something that like the king and the queen would like gift to him, and it was just like, but when it hit, I was like, dang, that is the character right there, and it was amazing. Whereas Callie was just named after my dog. Which I feel like just speaks to both their characters like so deeply.
Oh my god,
That's amazing.
Always the
Also,
best.
the dads in this book, like the dad energy, just impeccable, completely impeccable throughout. I want them to be my dads.
I love them, and I love the love for them. And like, I don't know about you guys, but like writing positive parental interactions is like the hardest thing in middle grade, because you want a supportive presence, but you also need someone to be like irresponsible enough to kind of let the kids go off and have their adventure. And boy, is Nick that person. We love him. Yeah. Disaster by Dad. I love him. Especially when he's away from Neil, who keeps him a little bit more, on the right path. I love it. He had a really bad drinking problem and depression at one point, but I'm glad that didn't last.
Yeah.
I had a student who read Sir Callie to do a close reading essay, and she was like, I thought Callie's dad was trans for the longest time, and she was like, I was so sure that I can't now read him as anything else. So,
which one? Which dad?
Crap, I forgot which one. I will look while we.
Probably the Chaos Gremlin, if I had to guess.
Amazing.
I can't remember. I gotta find it. Let me find it.
Well, I was so glad you mentioned the dad's Ash, because that's literally was my next question. Is kind of like, that's my one. Also, was my specific moment. Like I love, and I also just I want to hear about what it's like crafting the adult. I wanted to hear about crafting adults in middle grade, because like Nicole said, the suicide rate drops 50%. Like, and so that's such a huge thing in middle grade. And what I loved in Sir Callie was the the dads let the kids go off on their adventure, but at the end of the day, they were like, okay, you're kids.
Yes,
let's take care of this.
Mm-hmm. No, it was really fun and really hard, but I love the juxtaposition between you've got Perrin, who's just himself. We don't like him. And then you have Awala, who's really genuinely doing her best, but it's not enough. And then you have Nick, who makes all these mistakes because he's a privileged white guy. But he's learning from that. He's open to these new ideas and new experiences because he wants the best for his kid. But more than that, he wants more for the kingdom and more for the place that he loves. And it was really important for me to kind of use Callie as a bridge to the example of what family should be, and when, no spoilers, but Elwyn and Edwin kind of escaping from their parents, it's really hard to jump into a supportive system when you haven't had that, because you're always kind of waiting for the shoe to drop. And that's something that I really explore much more in book 2, but in book 1, especially I needed Nick to be the example of what love could be. So that was my intention. And Willow was a little bit more complicated because, Willow is her last surviving son. She's kind of on her own with her family, but her kingdom is also her child. So it's kind of she's working out how to protect both when they're clashing. So that was a really fun and scary thing to explore. I don't remember what the question was, but that's what I have to say.
Just talk about writing the adults and writing the parents. I'd love to hear. Yeah.
You guys have parents in your stories too.
I was like, oh, should we talk about that?
I think with parents, I think it's important to, I always feel like with middle grade, it's the story for the most part is about this main character and that age group kind of learning their place within their friends and family. So the parents are so important, or guardians are so important, because they really, middle graders, they don't have the kind of, agency that anyone older would. They can't just, go to the store. They can't just make a lot of their own decisions because they're so tied up in the adults in their lives. So to kind of remember that when writing and shaping these adult characters, I think that's important. I I don't think they always need to be likable. I don't think that everyone's parents are likable. But I do like to give at least one supportive adult in my books. I don't believe that everyone has a supporting adult in their life, but I like to write that supporting adult so that, if a reader doesn't have one, well, here's one. Yeah. Or like, here's an example of one so you can see maybe things aren't, maybe you can look for those kind of qualities in someone to be on your side. So I think about that a lot, kind of how important of a role adults play in kids' lives that kids don't have a choice in or a say in, and what that means for the kid, and how to kind of explore those guardian parental dynamics with your kid in the story.
Well, for better or for worse, like the kids' world is the grown-ups around them, And I think that's a really important thing to remember in middle grade when you're writing it.
Yeah. I mean, even in a book like Callie, where you have these kids go around this big adventure, all the adults in their lives are driving the strings and kind of making these kids have to go on the adventures in the first place. So without the adults, you can say that they're off doing their independent thing, but they're not. It's all echoes of the adults in their lives. That's kind of pulling that back.
Yeah, I love that. I think that like the adults that I've written are like similarly a widespread. Like they're sometimes trying their best, sometimes really super not trying their best and not even showing up at all, right? But yeah, I agree. I love having like an adult figure, right? Like, it's so difficult. Like, I'm glad that you said that about like adults driving the story often, like externally, because like it can be really tricky to write a story where a middle grade character, especially even in fantasy, has enough agency, because children really have almost like no agency in the real world, right? Like there's usually, I mean, if they're lucky, they'll have somebody, like you said, in their life, maybe not a parent, but an adult in their life who's supportive of them, right? But it can be so difficult for them to have agency and make their own choices and like carve out their own identity. And I'm often like kind of walking the line of being, I think especially when you're writing queer characters, like I do feel a responsibility to not encourage the reader to go like out yourself or make yourself super vulnerable to any adult in your life, because for some people that's really not safe. It's like terribly unsafe. So my idea is always to help my readers identify safe adults in their life who are supportive of them and who see them, right? Like, so find the person who's supportive of you and is being respectful of you and your personhood, right? That's how to find them. It feels more like I'm making a blueprint toward like, this is a good person, go this way. And you don't necessarily have to, have the approval of, like, in the case of Callie's mom, like, well, it's not going to happen, right? So you wouldn't encourage them to go like face down with Callie's mom. Like, why would you do that, right? Or maybe if it comes up, like she would be in a situation of being supported, right? Yeah. It's a good question.
Yeah, and like also like on the topic of like forgiveness, that was a really big thing because I had consideration for all of like the parents and like the way that they could like reconcile with the kids. And I had a draft where Willow's dad comes back and he's just like, hi, I'm here now. I'm just like, no, that's not gonna happen. And it was really important for me also that Elowen like outwardly verbally refuses to forgive her parents, particularly her mother, who's like pretending or whatever to, repent or whatever. And she's just rejecting that forgiveness, because I feel like that was something that is often quite taboo in middle grade. It's not something that I've personally seen before, but it also really speaks to my experience. It's just like, you don't have to forgive the people who hurt you, even if they're sorry, even if they're genuinely sorry, like you don't have to accept that apology. And, you can still stay with the people who have proven themselves worthy of your love, even grown-ups have to work for it, right? So that was really important to me. And, even people doing their best, sometimes your best isn't enough.
I love that, it was, you have all these, you write these characters with these moms that are maybe not, redeemable or not, worthy of their forgiveness. And so, especially with Callie, having this middle grade book where the dad in the parental unit with the mom and the dad, and then both dads are the supportive, we've got you, we'll figure this out, and it's the mom who you don't see that dynamic a lot. I feel like a lot of the time people feel like when you're presenting mothers to children, they need to be, mother's job is to live with their child, but that's not always how where it's, no, the mother isn't. The mother is the one who is not in this family unit anymore. It's Callie and her dad's. I always think about in my first book, Fig's mom left when she was a baby, mostly because I just needed her not around. But the fact is that, she's not around. And at every school visit I do, someone asks why Fig's mom isn't there. And to have to, first of all, every time when it first started, I was like, oh God, I have to explain absentee mothers to a bunch of fifth graders. But to be able to say no, sometimes moms aren't right to be moms. Sometimes moms don't want to be moms. And you always, every once in a while you have a kid who's like, my mom's not around either, but my dad is, just like Fig. And to be able to kind of tell those stories that go against a little bit of what society presents as okay, and to say that, no, it's okay. Not all moms are great moms, and that's okay. That's not a reflection on Callie. Reflection on these kids. And so I thought that was really, really great when I first started reading, how right off the bat it's like, no, Callie's mom is not with them, but Callie's dad is. Yes.
And on that note, I remember writing the prologue and rewriting the prologue. And I had an initial one where it was Nick who's just like, we got to get out of here, we're leaving. But it was really important for me for him to specifically give Callie the choice. And it's just like, we can stay or we can go, and it's up to you. And, I often find that in revision, I come back to giving the kids more autonomy and more choice than I do in initial drafts, because, kids don't have choices 90% of the time. It really sucks. So giving children those big choices and kind of trusting them to know themselves and what they need, and putting their faith in the people who can help them is super important, especially when it comes to grown-ups.
Yeah. Amazing. We are coming in on out of time. We have one more question from the audience, and then I have one more question to end us for the evening. So Lisa asks, do you feel the pressure of juggling the mission of creating a story with the weight of giving these kids lifelines? And have you had to make other choices for your books because of this tension?
It's a really good question. You guys can go first. I'm going to think.
I think it's a really excellent question. I think that we have to be aware of our audience in ways that other authors might not. And I think that does play heavily into the choices that I make for my stories, and I'm sure you guys as well. It's just we have to be so aware of who's picking up these books, and as you were talking about the pressure of thinking about, will this kid get in trouble for taking these books home? And it's almost, I don't want to use the word ridiculous because that's not what I mean, but it's almost a ridiculous thought to have.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
To have it, it adds that kind of pressure. And at the same time, we just want to tell stories. We just want to write and give these kids a place to stay and read. And so I do think it's a great question, because, you want to find a way to balance both, to balance that awareness of these kids that you're writing for, giving them all the things that you want to give them, with just telling a story.
Yeah.
For me, it was a balance between giving kids an escape, but also arming them with the tools that they really need to keep their hope kind of kindled, So it's a combination of a fun adventure story that you can sink into with playing on the beach is great. But also, telling them that the world is a scary place, but it's going to be okay. You can get through this. It's going to be hard, and it's probably going to get harder before it gets easier. But there is hope on the other side of the bridge,
Yeah.
Metaphorically and literally. Wait.
I don't know if I'm thinking about that. I don't know that it's heavier than everyday life as a queer person. Because I don't know what would the comparison be to not have that at the forefront of my mind, because I don't know what that feels like. I don't know what it feels like to not constantly be worried about that. So I don't know. It must be nice if you don't have to think about that sort of thing. Dang. I don't even know what that would feel like. So I guess that's my answer.
Yeah,
I think in terms of like, having to make choices, different choices.
Yeah. I think that it's always in the forefront of my mind, always.
Yeah.
Like thinking that way. Well, because I'm also a parent, right? And I have kids who are queer. So like I'm never not thinking that way about how I'm talking to people and how it might be received by like three degrees of separation by other people, and how they might be reacted to if they took my advice to heart. So like I don't know. It's so wrapped up into part of my life. I don't really know what it would be like to not think that way.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you all three of you for this conversation. This has been absolutely wonderful. My last question for the evening is it's a question A and B. So first, I'd love to hear what just is one thing that excites you about being able to put books like this out there in the world for these kids, or specifically, or if it's specifically about Callie, that's Sir Callie, that's totally fine as well. What excites you about this being available out there, and why does that bring you joy? And then also, if you want to plug anything you have coming up, what's coming next, that is also great as well.
I know, for me, just like, I can't believe that I get to do this. That's crazy. I can't believe that I get to write these messy queer kids, and it's like widely published and widely available. Just the fact that it's an option for kids to pick up is just, it blows my mind every time. I'm just so excited to share these characters with everyone. Like, that's crazy, because they're such a part of me, and like, we've been working together for so long. Like, I love them so much, and I'm excited to send them out into the world and kind of hope that they can learn some lessons from them, and take a hand and make a pinky promise and have a good time. Keep an eye out for Sir Callie too. Hey, it's gonna be fun. It is the most Esme book I've ever written, and I'm really excited to start sharing things about it.
I am most excited about Callie too as well. But
I think I promise.
It still blows anytime there's a new queer middle grade book out. I'm like, oh my God, this exists for kids. But for Sir Callie, especially, having this particular type of adventure fantasy story, with this non-binary kid being a knight and just kind of doing their thing, and having all these messy kids and having that exist for someone to read, I think that's the most exciting thing for me. Just that it exists for kids to pick up and see. Like, that's wild. That's awesome. And then from me, I have Camp Quilt Bag that I co-wrote with AJ Sass. It's about a queer summer camp that comes out in March 2023, so next year. And then I am launching a new middle grade series, The House on Sunrise Lagoon. The first 2 books come out in May.
So excited.
It's one of those, classic big family stories, except it's 2 moms, a 2-mom household with a mix of biological and adopted kids, and it's kind of my queer take on those big family classics.
My heart is so full just thinking about
it. So good.
I'm so excited.
Okay, well, I think that I'm the most excited about queer, trans, non-binary kids having characters that they can cosplay. And this is not only limited to like kids, but I've seen like older people, like high school, college age, young adults, like doing this, because I mean, like, we didn't have that to do. So people are getting excited about it. People are like sharing, like, sometimes I hear from readers about like coming out stories because they read about a non-binary character and they're like, I really felt right about those pronouns. So like, I don't know. It brings me so much joy to see people get to enjoy culture together and to like share it and celebrate it and let it take on a life of its own. It's beautiful. And I love it. I'm so excited for you guys' up and coming projects. I can't wait to have them on my shelves. I have one coming out in May that's called Beautiful Something Else. And it's a story that's like real soft, magical realism about a character who has a parent who has an addiction struggle, and they end up going and living with their estranged aunt who is trans on a farm that's communal and full of queer people of all ages. And they kind of get this chance to have like a supportive community that they haven't had before. And that comes out in May. And I'm so excited about it. Yeah.
I moved to this communal farm, like,
yeah. Next year's shelf is going to be so much fun, guys.
Well, amazing. There is a lot of love for Callie going on in the chat. And Lisa is bragging lovingly about having already read Callie 2. We are all
Lisa.
okay, humble brag.
Fine.
And it looks like there was a few people that were late. This will be saved for later, so you are welcome to watch it whenever you want. So thank you so much, everyone. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you for having us. Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh, this has been a pleasure. Absolutely.
I feel like we've been planning this since like we did Sabrina's like a year ago.
Absolutely. Literally, it was like a year. Yeah, absolutely. But this has been great. So thank you so much. And we'll, until next time, have a good one.
Thank you, friends.
Bye.